Hi, everybody. I'm pretty impressed, I must say. When we were talking earlier in the morning, we said, well, we are lucky if we'll have like one row of people at 8 a.m. in the morning. So I'm quite happy that I can see more than one row filled. With that being said, I'm going to start. As I've mentioned, I'm with Hyperledger. I've been with Hyperledger for the last 3 years. I'm one of the first employees there. How many of you know what Hyperledger is? Oh my god, I should have taken a photo of that. I'm so happy. Good. So let's start with actual topic. It is not a surprise to you to say that, or it wouldn't be a surprise to you to admit that collaboration is hard. It's even hard to decide where you want to eat. Now try to find a spot where to eat and then convince others to come with you. Collaboration is simply hard. And then it comes to open source. Open source is all about collaboration, all about openness and communication, which is not something we naturally like to do. And obviously, I love XKCD, that's the geeky part of me. But in Linux Foundation, we are trying to kind of define and set standards around open source. We actually have a to-do group which focuses on how enterprises can work with open source. And I'll talk a bit about it in a second. So open source innovation has a methodology of its own, and it's quite important to understand that it's a very different way for enterprises to work and to innovate. You all of a sudden have to kind of drop your ego and start thinking about the collaboration and cooperation with others. And that is hard, but it's also very useful, very helpful. And that's why we started Linux Foundation. Linux Foundation was started 20 years ago to provide the governance around Linux kernel, so the core of the operating system. But that governance, that bringing enterprises together, worked out pretty well. And we started creating more and more projects around it. And today we have many more than just the core Linux project. We are dedicated to building sustainable ecosystem around open source projects, and we hope that by working together we can build the world's greatest shared investment in the technology. And there are some, as I mentioned, we have now about 80 different projects, all the way from very famous ones. I like Cloud Native Computing Foundation, or Cloud Foundry, Node.js, all the way to much smaller ones like Automotive Grade Linux or the To-Do group that I mentioned. These projects focus on certain industry, on certain topic, and bring enterprises together and the open source community to work on that particular topic and create something that can be shared between everyone. Wrong. So yeah, and then 3 years ago, we started Hyperledger. Hyperledger was, 4 years ago now. Hyperledger is an open source collaboration that is hosted by the Linux Foundation, and we focus particularly on advancing the blockchain business technologies. So 4 years ago, I'm sure you all remember, Bitcoin was crazy, and I was with a Bitcoin company previously and enjoyed that space. And enterprises were like trying to wrap their head around what is it with that Bitcoin space? What do we do? And 30 different companies came to the Linux Foundation and said, hey, do you want to do something with it? And we said, sure, but not with Bitcoin, but with the underlying technology. And by now I don't have to tell you that blockchain and Bitcoin are not the same thing. But there are other open source initiatives out there. It is not just Linux Foundation, and I'm here to preach open source, not to preach Linux Foundation. So for the kind of completeness, some of the ones that I urge you to check out and look at are Apache Foundation or Mozilla Foundation, Software Freedom Law Center. So there are open source projects and open source initiatives all around the globe that help you to understand the nature of it. And there are many reasons why you want to work with open source. You have the control because you can look exactly at the code and contribute to that code. You have flexibility because licenses allow you to modify that code. So it's not that you just buy a thing, a black box package, and now you can't do anything with it, or you have to pay someone to do it. No, your developers, your employees can play with it, can understand it, can inspect it, which is a very high, very big aspect of the security. You know what you're buying, you know what is happening under it, or downloading for that matter. You've made buys open source code, but mostly you'll just download it for free, and it is reliable. And first, I think the most important thing, the one that I really love about open source, is the longevity of the code. It is not the case that if the company goes down, and I'm sure you all experience that from at some point in your life, that your favorite game provider went bankrupt or got acquired and your favorite game is not updated anymore, or you were using some kind of a different software, PowerPoint didn't go down yet, but other company that will provide you a software that is crucial to your business, for some reason they disappear and you can no longer use that software, and you have to redefine your business. And there is also of great value to open source offices. So a place where you can advise and help your employees understand how to work with open source. And it is just open source. You have to understand that open source is much more than just code. It is some documents, guidelines, and standards. These are great ways of contributing to the open source world and convincing others to use what you're using. It is not that you have to give away your whole IP. I'm not asking you to do that here. What I'm telling you is that if you start sharing your best practices, the world will start working hopefully the way you want it to work, which is very useful because then we can start collaborating and we can start talking the same language. If we are all working with black boxes, it's kind of hard to trust each other. And it's very interesting when you compare the number of blockchain projects that were steadily growing from 2016 and the number of GitHub repositories, which is the graph on the left, right, on the right. Because blockchain brings that open sourceness to the world. I think that observing the enterprise world and the companies, for the first time I saw such a massive uptake of open source and starting that discussion around open source. And Hyperledger is, as any project within Linux Foundation, also 100% open source. And that means that we are not paid to play. You don't get to tell us what to do or tell the community what to do just because you became a member of Hyperledger. The governance is, as we could say, a duocracy. So the people that do more get higher vote or stronger position in the community and get to lead that community. And we, as employees of Hyperledger, don't have control over people that developed any of the Hyperledger code bases. We just we are there, as Brian likes to say, my boss, we are the flight controllers. We try to navigate everybody and help everybody work together. And Hyperledger, thanks to that, is led by a very diverse community. And that's another thing that when working with open source, you benefit from, because you're one company, even if international, is about a single mindset. But open source is about everybody from any age, any place in the world, working on the same topic, which means that they have different viewpoints, they have different sensitivities. And that's a very important thing if you want to build a truly global, truly reusable product. And we started with 5 different projects. Back when I started, I had a very simple job of explaining what Hyperledger is. It became slightly more complicated with the number of projects we have today. But that's also because companies around the world understood that with blockchain, even enterprise-grade blockchain, you do want to use open source projects. All of them are under Apache license and all of them are free to download. And I can't tell you how many times I've had people coming to me and saying, oh, I'm building my code on my product on Hyperledger. was like, oh, I didn't know that. Tell me more about it. And I'll tell you a bit about how you can learn more in a second. So everything in Hyperledger, if you want to understand how to work, again, is open to public. So you have mailing lists, you have wiki. Anybody can change wiki as well. If you see bugs, if you want to report problems with it, that's open to anybody. You don't have to ask for permission to do it. And we have working groups, which are, again, open to public. So if you're not a technical person, if you don't know how to start your adventure with blockchain and open source, come to our working groups. They are dial in, very leisure, just there are so many topics you could be talking about and working on. We have special interest groups which are focused on specific vendor, and I know that here there are tracks, today we'll have tracks around supply chain, about healthcare. All of this is covered by our community, and these are people that are just wanting to talk about something that is interesting to them and want to solve problems in that industry. We do provide training and certification. So if you want to learn more about blockchain as such, these are, again, open source trainings and certifications. And the last question probably is, does it work, right? Does all of that investment, all of that convincing that we have to do and navigating the community, does it help? So one way to see that would be to come to our global forum, which will be happening in Phoenix, in Arizona, it's in March, and we'll have over 70 talks from different partners talking about how they are working on open source code, what they're doing with Hyperledger. But also, if you look at the numbers, you see that open source is really something that people are taking up. We've started 4 years ago. Now, as you can see, we have 14 different projects. We have 3 production releases. And we have over 62,000 participants in 175 cities around the world. It's incredible to think of how many people are passionate about this topic and want to talk, want to understand what they could do with it and contribute to it. And the other part of it is that once you start working with open source, every single company is then enforced, or kind of the market forces everybody else in your ecosystem to take up the same code, to take up the same kind of mindset. So with Hyperledger Fabric, one company started offering them on their cloud, and now all major cloud providers offer it, because all of a sudden that was the way to go. That was kind of, people were choosing that rather than some paid solutions. So now everybody wanted to use it. So I could tell you a bit more about use cases, and I know that I promised to cut some time down, so I'll just go through a couple of them. Circular is one very interesting company that does ethical mining of tantalum. And they used blockchain to make sure that tantalum, being classified as a conflict material, is mined and transported under the OECD approved conditions. So now something that is a very hard material to mine and very dangerous, or from a human perspective, not a great thing to do. Now that process is much more smoothed out and verifiable, so that we don't have to ask that question. It's similar to what Everledger is doing with diamond supply chain, where they make sure that diamonds don't come from conflict areas. Again, using Hyperledger Fabric for traceability of it and transparency of that. Another interesting example is rice traceability. That platform is built in China, and it's interesting to see also how China and Asia in general took up work with open source. And many people would say, oh, it's a very conservative country with very strict government, but yet, yes, China is what we have. Over 40% of our members come from China or Asia Pacific, and then out of that about 80% are China. So it is a very big market for blockchain. So what they are doing is they are tracing the rice from source, from farm, all the way to where it's being sold. And the platform collects data from different sources, including over 30,000 farmers and almost 13 million mu of farmland and 400,000 planters. And the rice quality is tracked through that platform, and already 10% of the rice production in China is traced on that platform, which is, I would say, pretty incredible, thinking about how much rice is being sold from China. Aerospace marketplace, that's a really interesting case study from Honeywell. So what they did is they took a very standard and old school process of tracking parts and trading parts for airplanes, which, as you can imagine, is a bit sensitive topic because you don't want parts to be malfunctioning or in some way damaged. So they moved that into an Amazon-style marketplace where you can track every part, instantly deliver it to the airplane that you need, reducing the downtime of airplanes, but also increasing the security. So I'm going to skip through other ones, and I'm happy to talk to you about all the kind of use cases that we have, all the stuff that I know about blockchain. So just ping me on the app. If you are interested in learning more, please go to our member vendor directory or to our blockchain showcase, even better. That's where you'll learn about all the projects that members and non-members do on Hyperledger and with open source. And with that, thank you, and I wish you a great conference.